Okay, good to go, Bim.
Welcome, councillors and staff, to the workshop. The agenda's been distributed, and we have 3 items this evening to work through, which is the budget, which Mark Lay will go through. Then we've got the Drought Committee program and the discussion on the council meeting direction in respect to preference to remain electronic meetings for the June. So, but before we commence, I just want to touch base on the fact of the recovery plan document that's now been distributed, and I've had a number of radio interviews about the Barossa Council recovery plan. So congratulations to the CEO and the staff for that document. It's been circulated to Barossa Tourism, Barossa RDA, and Barossa Grape and Wine, and there's some positive responses coming back from there, and we're going to circulate it a little bit further as well, because I think it's a document that is really is flexible and does all the things that I think is needed under this current epidemic crisis that we've gone through and coming out the other side. So with that in mind, Martin, do you want to introduce Mark and anything that you want to add before you throw to Mark? I'll hand over to you.
Nah, thanks, Bim. Straight to Mark.
Go for it, Mark.
Thank you, Mayor. If that's okay, I'll share the PowerPoint presentation screen with you again, like previous occasion.
And I might add before you start, Mark, I reckon we'll go with the attention in the chat box. I'll keep an eye on that, and I'll keep my notes, and I'll be able to follow it down the list. So if you want to come in at any stage, just go through the attention. I didn't, with the hand waving, it was good in some respects, but let's stay with the attention tonight. What do you reckon? Thank you.
Just checking that you can see the PowerPoint presentation on the screen, can you?
Yes.
Thank you. So the workshop 27th of May, and just start again with that first line there. I must love 2018. I've used the same year there, it's 2019. And in that very first line there in relation to the long-term plan. I will go through the items on this particular first slide here that's been changed since last week. I won't go through the things we've already been through. So the first item there that I want to just touch base with is the COVID-19 recovery plan has now been added to the long-term plan. So the slides that you see tonight include a $330,000 amount in the 2021 year and a further $120,000 in the 21-22 year for that recovery plan. Further to that, some discussion that we can have tonight is in relation to the suggested general rate targeted rebate. And so within this information tonight, we have provided for $150,000 in the 2021 year for a targeted rebate program, which we can talk about. The other thing we've done is that we've received some information that the financial assistance grants from the federal government was going to be paid early. And we put in that particular long-term plan, $671,000, a timing thing being received in 1920 and half received in 2021. Today we received the information that's now sitting in our financial LGFA investment account, slightly more than that amount, and that will be put into the long-term plan. The other one that was announced last week was this item here regarding the local roads and community infrastructure package, which will be paid in July for $565,000. And Council can discuss in relation to which particular program in the budget that they wish to assign that to.
Mark, just to clarify, that is new money. That's no money being brought forward. That is definitely new money.
That is correct, Mayor. That is new money that the federal government has provided for all councils throughout Australia. Within Council's budget for the 2021 year, there was a significant amount of projects that required grant funding to ensure that they were going to be able to be built, and Council can decide which of those projects, or if another project for that matter, they wish to assign that money to. At this stage, it's been put in the long-term plan as an operating grant in the Council's financials. So the funds are showing within the numbers you see tonight. They are showing is that money being received in cash and also income in the 2021 year, with no assigned projects apart from the one that Council's had a look at last workshop. And appreciation. Sorry.
Oh no, just before you move on, is there any time frame on that new money for the roads to be spent? And I have a question there from Don Barrett as well. So can you? Is there any time frames on that money?
In relation to when Council needs to advise what it is?
Yep,
Is that what you mean?
And
right.
The expenditure of it.
I'm not sure about the expenditure of it, but there certainly was, with some information received late yesterday, I think it was, from another council, to show the amounts that were provided throughout Australia for this grant, along with the requirements for what the projects needs to be spent on, similar to the roads to recovery type methodology.
Yep.
It has to be spent by 30 June next year.
30 June. Okay, I thought that was the case. Yep. Don?
Thanks, Ben. Very, very quick question. I was speaking to a councillor from the Adelaide Hills councillor today, and he was advising me they've just picked up some black spot funding as well. We got any black spot funding at all?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. There's been. I tried to tell you last week, but I was told it was confidential at that stage. I think we're out of that now, aren't we, Martin? I think I seen it in the leader today, didn't I?
Yeah, well, it was announced earlier in the week, so yeah. You can say whatever you like now.
Okay, no, it's 500,000 for the Penrise Stockwell Road intersection, and I met with Tony Passon this morning for a media promotion of that funding. So yeah, council staff had put in a grant application, and we were successful with black spot funding. Yes.
Thanks for the clarification. Appreciate it.
Yeah, certainly that black spot funding matches the road that has been put in there for dollars, such dollar for dollar. It's 100% funded, should say.
Yep.
100% funded.
Yes.
So that's a good one to get. Depreciation, just on that point there, we have used some projections for the depreciation for the next financial year and the forward years in the plan. And as I've mentioned before, when the building condition audit is done during 2020, we'll have some more information on that to refine those numbers. Water charges have been reduced from what we paid for in the 1920 year for a normal usage year, assuming that the 2021 year won't be a drought year as it has been for a couple of years. Last item is just for your information. Next item on the slide is in relation to a summary of the rating options that you are looking at tonight. And information just for an update. We're now at 0.83% growth. We, once again, within all the financial information, we're assuming that it will get to 1%. When we looked at this last week, it was 0.7, so it has grown a little bit since then. And the four options that have so far been assessed by or looked at by this council in the workshops is option one is where there is no indexation for the service costs, but allowing for whatever the growth cost may be. Option two, we're no longer providing that information. We're now including growth in all the options. Option three is a 0.75% indexation on the service cost plus the growth. Option four being a 1% increase on the service cost and plus growth. Now that 0.75% and that 1% and the growth is all added to the general rate revenue that council raised for the 1920 year to come up with a total rate revenue that is required for the 2021 year. Individual assessments, depending on their valuation changes, will vary from that. So it's total rate revenue that we're looking at with those percentages I just mentioned. Waste service charges although there has been no changes in the actual financial information that is presented tonight, the Director of Development and Environmental Services advises me that there has been an update in relation to the sorting charges. Did you want to touch on that?
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, very briefly, I had informal conversation with the CEO at Norma just to ask if there was any potential increase in the costs. He replied today to indicate that the draft budget for Norma is currently for consideration by the board and the constituent councils, and that there will be a likely increase in the sorting charge.
Any idea what likely might be, Gary?
In the order of probably anywhere between $15 and $20 increase.
Per tonne?
Per tonne, yes.
Yep.
So, I mean, without, obviously he didn't want to give me an accurate figure, because obviously it's still quite confidential at this stage. But I believe that he's saying that our contractor should be receiving formal notification within the week.
Thank you.
So as the service charges for waste and swims both require the amount of service charge to be what it costs us to maintain those services, that recycling cost may increase during our next month or so when we get more information. The actual swim service cost since the last meeting, been able to reduce that from 3% down to 2.54%. And some further work that our rates officer and myself were doing today in the swims area, that may be even reduced slightly again, because we're getting a bit more growth in that area. And so we only need to make sure we've got enough revenue to make sure that that is sufficient to maintain that service. So we'll obviously, when we come to set the rates, by the time it comes to the end, even during consultation, if more information comes to hand with waste and swims, we will refine those fees so that they're actually only reflecting the cost to maintain those services. So that one will probably go down a little bit more. In relation to operating income expenditure, very similar to the last slides that you received last week, apart from that COVID information and that grants information that we've just talked about. Further to that, the actual end result of the operating results for those options 1, 3 and 4, you can see they're all in forecasting a deficit for next year as a result of those changes. And I'll move on. There's no change in the capital budget at this point in time from last week. Next slide is now looking at option 1 and looking at the KPIs and financial forecasts with that particular no service charge increase, but to allow for 1% growth all the way through. And what I have done from the slides last week is inserted a row in there to show what the adopted long-term plan was, increases for the general rates, and what this particular option does now to, in the future, to try and make our way back to an operating surplus position. As a result of those additions that we spoke about earlier, this plan does not forecast an operating surplus within the 10-year period. It's probably going to be in year 11 or 12 at this stage with this particular option. And you'll see that the items that are highlighted are the areas where we're outside of our adopted target ranges for those key performance financial indicators. I'll keep moving on now unless someone stops me, all right?
Yes, I have Councillor Uwe-Smith. Carla.
Yeah, that was just on the previous slide with the operating results there. I just wanted to clarify that that was taking into consideration the federal government community and infrastructure package.
Sorry, the amount that was mentioned earlier on that was coming on the 1st of July, the yep. 565,000, yep. Yes, that includes the 565,000. That's after receiving those funds, yes.
Yep, okay, thanks.
Thank you. One of the differences that we've added to from the slides last week is this little line here is allowing amount of $150,000 for the COVID-19 rebate applications if the council decides to have that targeted approach. along with the $330,000 that Council was committing to the recovery plan for COVID-19. So those three things going in there has still kept the situation as a operating deficit, even though they're slightly offsetting each other. The other item that has caused that to happen is the federal government paying half of the 2021 financial assistance grants in 1920. So there's 670,000 that has been moved back into 1920. The cash is in the bank at the beginning of all this, but we don't recognise the income in 2021 anymore. We recognise it in 1920. So that also has had that effect there. But you'll notice that the operating surpluses going forward in the future years are still blowing out a little bit before we start to make our way back to a positive position, but outside of these 10 years, as I've mentioned. So I'll move on again. So this is the rate modelling that we use to provide that financial rating perspective. And what we've provided for you this year as well is not only have we shown the average valuations for these different local government categories, and bearing in mind these averages is when we've tried to take out all the development out of the property ranges. So they're only showing a person who had a property, where a property was there last year and the property is there next year, and the only changes are its valuation changes that the Valuer General has provided, and taken out as much as we can of the development. So if they had a block of land before, it's now with a house on it, or they finished off a house. And as you can see, the rates in the dollar are listed down here on that column there, differential rate in the dollar. And we're showing the rates in the dollar we used last year and the rates in the dollar we're using this year for the rate modelling option 1 is to have a 0 service charge increase. So what we do is we have a look at all the local government categories and have a look how that affects the properties at the property level throughout these local government categories to try and achieve a balanced sort of approach to how the services are charged to the local government categories. We can't affect individual properties within residential or commercial, but we can en bloc reduce the rate in the dollar charge, reflecting the average valuation increase that has happened in those particular government codes. I'll give an example. The residential average valuation increase is 3.25%. So we've reduced the rate in the dollar charge by 2.7. One that's a bit higher was the commercial was at 4%. So we've reduced the rate in dollar charge a little bit more to try and reflect an increase which is compatible to the increase that's happened in the residential area. We do this process every year to try and make sure that the rates are increasing by the same sort of pattern throughout the different local government categories. So we're not unfairly or unduly charging one more than the other, because typically the Valuer General, when they do their valuations, they go through and target sort of areas, but one might get it this year, next one might get it the following year in different areas, different townships, different localities. So what we try and do is smooth those increases out so that across the board, they're all sort of getting a similar sort of increase, as it were, from the previous year. Because a lot of these valuation changes are not necessarily anything they've done on the property, it's just the valuation of those properties have gone up. But it still costs the same to provide those services to those areas. The streets haven't changed, the footpaths haven't changed, etc., etc. So as you can see, as you work your way down, prime production's 4.39% increase. So we've reduced the rate in the dollar by 3.5 to try and keep it compatible for the increases compared to the other local government categories, and so on. So you understand that process?
Any questions?
I'll move on.
Yep.
Thank you. Move on to the next one. So then what we do is we have a look, okay, what does that mean for a charge perspective? Bearing in mind the items that we talked about earlier on, swims and refuse may change and recycling may change, those service charges. But we're looking at reducing that swims charge from $3.46, it might go to $3.45. So it's only $1, but it's a difference here and there. But then you might have the recycling cost, which has gone in amongst the refuse cost from 161 last year to 175 this year. That might have to be 176 or 177, depending on how much that increase is that we get passed on, or council may choose to wear it and use the reserve that it has to fund that for this financial year. like was done last year for the state government levy that was increased. Council decided to wear that cost a little bit and see what happened next year. So as you can see, what we've got here is in this column right in the middle is the general rates increase, including the fixed charge. We've suggested the fixed charge goes up by 1%, so 356 to 360 as part of this service charge / growth increase. So it's a minor increase. And then you can see the increases when you add those things together, the general rates, the fixed charge, and this is the percentage increases that are affected across the ranges by applying those rates in the dollar against the average valuations. Not everyone's valuation, the average. For option 1. Moving on to the next slide is then, because we're missing option 2 now, we now are including the growth as part of this process. Option 3 is a 0.75% increase in the general rate revenue from the previous year and 1% growth. And by using the 0.75%, as you'll see through the operating results on that little row through the middle there, we get to an operating surplus position just by year 10. Year 9's close, and year 10 is definitely an operating forecast position with all the factors we know about today. And the other items, there's a couple of little items there that are outside of the range in relation to operating surplus, but they're only 1 year, and they come back fairly well straight away, and slowly you can see they're making their way back to a better position. The asset funding renewal ratio, the one that's on the bottom of all the slides, it won't change with all the things that we're doing here tonight. That is a reflection of asset renewal spend / the asset management plans review that's happening in the next few months as well. And I'll move along because you've seen the information that's on this, but you can see once again now we've reduced the rate in the dollar for these ones as well, but by not as much, because the fact is that we need to try to raise a little bit more revenue with this one, extra 0.75% rate revenue. So that we're reducing all the rates in the dollar and the same sort of ratios as we've done on the last slide to reflect those that have had the highest valuation increase, have the highest reduction in the rate in the dollar. So they sort of counteract each other. I'll move along unless someone stops me. And then this is showing that in dollar terms. Service charges won't change from the previous slide, but you would see that the gap between last year and this year on this column in the middle would be slightly more, because slightly generating slightly more rates than the other slide. Moving on to option 4, same as option 3, except we're using a 1%, rounded off to 1% increase in the service charge, plus the 1% growth. We're almost in operating position by year 9, operating surplus position in year 9, this one. And there's a couple less shaded areas within the actual operating surplus position because we get closer to where our target ranges are with option 4 by putting a 1% charge. So you can see it just slowly, by the more obviously general rate revenue that council decides to raise, the quicker the operating result gets back into a positive position. And then option 4, once again, the rate and dollar charge, they're all reducing, all these options they're reducing, not just taking last year's rate in the dollar and letting the valuations take care of it. It's still reducing each of the rate and the dollar down to get to that 1% plus the 1% growth for the general rate revenue. And the last slide, the gaps between last year and this year is slightly more. In the residential area, it's pushed out $15 per year extra. Bearing in mind, $4 of that is the fixed charge. And the others are taking care of themselves. So that's the 3 options that council sort of requested last week for us to have a review of.
Sorry, Mark, can I ask a question?
Yes, sorry.
Sorry, when do we go back into surplus in option 4? What year?
It's in almost in year 9. It's $9,000 deficit in year 9.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
It's just about there by year 9. So council has now seen the 3 options that was requested last week. The only other item I would suggest, apart from those 3 options and any further discussion that council wants to have, is to consider the approach for the general rate rebate. And that is something that council sort of talked about at the end of the last workshop, and can certainly provide some more information on that in relation to how we can possibly make that happen. Done some preliminary numbers. That's where the 150,000 came from, just to try and work out how that could be approached. The preliminary information is, and we can provide that to council if you like as an email, is that information that's been provided through the CEO a little while ago, it's probably about a month ago now, that approximately 7% of the Barossa people have been affected by COVID-19, and the CEO can correct me on that percentage if need be. And so what I've done is grabbed 7% of the rate revenue across the board, and if we were to provide a rebate of 10%, that would be around about $150,000 of 7% of the rate revenue across the board. There's another approach that some councils are doing, and that is to provide a dollar amount. For example, $25 or $50 off of the council rates, of those rates that you saw on this slide here, for example, up to $100 perhaps even on their rates, so that they have got a reduction if they meet the criteria. And a lot of those councils that have gone down this path or investigating this avenue are suggesting that it's done by application, and that evidence is provided to council to ensure that they are in a situation where the COVID-19 is still affecting them during the 2021 year, in that there is a loss of income for the residential or the commercial shops or the industry or others in that local government categories in some shape or form are still being affected by COVID-19 into the 2021 year. And so some relief by a rebate is being provided if those organisations provide some evidence to show that they are still being affected. And then council can assess as to whether or not we have a set amount for that, or a certain percentage, or a bit of both. So there's an amount, but then there's also a percentage as well, so that there is some actual rate relief, not just an extension of time to pay the rates, but there's also a bit of relief in the actual financial amount that's provided, bearing in mind that council was already providing some relief in that if option 4 or option 3 or option 1 is provided, there is already rate relief from what would normally have happened, because of the fact that the original plan was 2.25% increase, so that council was actually reducing its something's happened there, I think.
Russell, you've got a question?
So I just want to check something on that sheet with the spreadsheet with the forward cash forecasts. That sheet shows that we return to a long-term financial plan 2.75% rate increase in subsequent years. Just want to check that I've read that correctly. Thank you.
Are you still seeing the slides that I have on the screen?
No, mate.
I've got a copy on another PC.
Yes, something went funny with the computer, then it lost its screen for some reason. I will try again. Are you seeing it now?
Yeah, we are now.
Okay. Something dropped out there for a second there. The screen went funny. Sorry about that. So I believe the question...
Excuse me, Mayor. BM.
Yep.
If you're not on mute, could you please just make sure you are muted?
Thank you. Well, I can hear my cat.
I believe the question from the council was in relation to rating option 4, in relation to, and you can see those numbers now. I didn't quite hear the question, I'm sorry.
So for example, in 21-22, where the modelling is actually suggesting a 2.25% rate increase, which is adopted from the long-term financial plan.
That is correct.
In other words, So in other words, if we apply a 1% rate increase this year, then the fact that we're making operating losses off into the future just shows the impact of 1 year taking a hit in terms of expenditure associated with COVID-19, rates, rebates, and this lower rate increase. I just want to be clear in my own mind, that's what we're doing.
That is correct, Councillor. And then for the next 6 years after that, there's a 2.75% increase. Yes. Where previously it was 2.25 and 2.5s in future years. Yeah. And of course, the other option is that council goes for a higher increase than 1%, which will then bring back some of these 2.75s to 2.5 probably, to be able to do that work. And the other thing that council may need to think about too, if a rebate is provided during the 2021 year, and I touched on that last week, is that if that's the case, we will be required to add some more administration in both customer service and also in the rating area to be able to provide that support for our customers who will be making applications to us online, or probably some people will come in person, no doubt, if that's the course that council wishes to take. And the other thing is too, we're not sure how long COVID-19 pressures are going to be on some organisations or residents, and that may be something that continues into year 2 or year 3 if there are some businesses that are still not quite right, if council wishes to go that way. The other thing to consider with the rebate option is that at this stage, council doesn't provide rebates for people who have been on the dole previously or receiving JobKeeper or JobSeeker previously, or its previous terms. So council just needs to be aware that there would be already some people who have already been receiving that financial income, who will not be any better off or worse off as they were prior to COVID-19 starting. So just that council needs to be aware of not setting precedents too that may actually bring up other issues. Of course, COVID-19 is a very unique thing that has happened, and this is a targeted one to try and help those that are in need. Not changing those situations that I mentioned were in the past already. The council had no control over those, but COVID-19 has certainly had an effect on lots of people, and through no fault of anybody's. So, but financial situations can be like that anyway. Just wanted to make that clear, that council needs to be aware of that. If council goes with a rebate situation, we'll need to come back with some analysis of administration, and also some more analysis of what rebates could be provided, and a way to approach it so that it's trying to be fair.
Tony, then David de Vries, and then Martin.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Mark, well, I just want to know whether all councillors are happy with the 1%, or should we be looking at, say, 1.25% now to lighten the load for those next 9 years? Instead of 2.75, it might come back to 2.5. Are we better to look at that? Because I guess in the next 12 months, at least, there'll be all the grape growers and there'll be quite a number of businesses. So I guess, will $150,000 actually be enough? And then how do we go about actually working out how much and what style the rebate will take?
Thanks, Tony. We'll sort of keep that in a vase for a moment and let other people have a comment. David de Vries?
Yeah, I'm going to be remarkably consistent with how I was last week. I'm really worried about the fact that we're digging ourselves into a hole, and we're going to limit our ability to respond to the coronavirus and the needs of our community. And I'd like to make sure that we dig ourselves the smallest possible hole and give us the maximum amount of flexibility that we can. Of the 3 options that are effectively up there, I think option 4 is the least worst. I'm concerned about the fact that that means we're going to be basically running a deficit for 8 years with, well, we're calling it a surplus in year 9, but barely. And I'm also concerned about the fact that while we give everybody relief for the first year, they're then being hit with the next 2 years with a 0.5% again. So that means next year will be harder for the people than they would have otherwise been, and then the year after also harder. And then we've got years 4 to 7, another 4 years where we're going to be hitting them with an extra 0.25. So I'm back to where I was last week for this. This is, I think, a bad option. Last time I was saying that we were giving them a sweetener for 1 year and then hitting them for 9. Well, this one we're only hitting them for 8. Again, I think that, as I spoke about last week, I'm probably going to lose in my household maybe anything up to 50% of my annual income. And I swear getting a $40 rebate or not rebate, but $40 off my rates other than what it would have otherwise been, or now I think it's down to $20. It feels like the council I'm gaining very little as a ratepayer, but the potential for the council to deliver services and to provide targeted assistance to those people who really need it concerns me. I'm willing to take one for the community, and talking to other people around the community, when I've explained that, would you rather save $20 or would you rather give the council the ability to pursue its goals and maintain the level of service, they've all come down in the latter. So I understand the temptation to say, well, look, let's make it a little bit easier for everybody this year coming up, or the next financial year. But I think the price that we're going to pay as a community and as individuals is going to be vastly overweighing what I consider to be a very minimal benefit. I think, again, the risk of repeating myself, I do believe a targeted approach is the most sensible option. Those people who genuinely need help, I think, should receive help. Those people who don't need the help, well, and clearly there's no reason to sort of blanket across the board. I understand why we're doing this. I would really personally like to see us deliver a budget that is as close to balanced as possible so that we're not pushing it out as long as we are. And when I compare, I'm right in saying this, Mark, that we are significantly lower in terms of our increase than our neighbours, both Gawler and Light. Maybe we leave the rates as they are right now in terms of rates in the dollar and allow the increase in valuations to do the dirty work for us. That could be an option. But at the moment, of the three, option 4 is, as I said, the least worst option. But I agree with Tony. I think that if there's a way that we can minimise the future pain, I would like to do that. Thanks.
Martin?
Thanks, Bim. I think there's 2 bits that I'd just focus on as well. I mean, a long-term plan is a long-term plan. It's 10 years, and there will be variation in that. And I'll argue that some of those last 4 years, $280,000 deficit is actually a very small deficit. Some of those earlier ones are a bit problematic. The capacity for us to continue to find efficiencies and savings is inherent. I don't know if I can get that much back, but it is there. And the other thing that trigger the council has, because we've only talked about rates or expenditure, well, expenditure flows from service levels. You can reduce service levels.
What would you suggest, Martin?
Russell, you there?
I'll unmute my microphone. Thanks, Tony and David. You've said what I wanted to say earlier. I think that we should hold a good balanced budget this year and be prepared to start doing what Martin's suggesting in future years, but give ourselves 12 months of wriggle room to do it sensibly. Thank you.
Any other questions that anybody has or thoughts?
Yeah, just one quick one, Bim. If we went up 0.25%, and I agree, we seem to be saying we should get these figures a little bit closer, and that's what I intimated first. before Dave came on, and then Russell was confirming that. So there seems to be some sort of a feeling that we should probably try to get that 280 odd thousand, or whatever that final figure is, I've just forgotten. We should try to get that a bit closer, and I think we should be doing it now rather than in, you know, over the next 9 years. So that will be painful. So how do we go about that? And what would, Mark, if you're listening, what would the figure roughly be? Have you got a ballpark figure of what we would have to increase it to get a balanced budget?
Sorry, can I start that one?
Yeah, sure.
You got to be really careful about that deficit, because it's an ad at the moment, and I haven't done the calculation because I haven't had time, is the underlying deficit is being impacted by the bringing forward of $700,000 worth of rates and only getting 560 back. So it's an artificially slightly higher deficit than what the true deficit is if everything remained constant and consistent. It's probably, I don't know off the top of my head, something more like $130,000 or $40,000 deficit. It's not a significant deficit, and yeah, you could claw a little bit of that back, but it's the future years. We need to buy time, in my view, to address those future years.
In response to the question before, 0.25% gives about $50,000 or $60,000 revenue. All right.
What was that again? Mark?
So a difference between, I've gone back to the slide which shows the difference between option 3 and option 4 in that first year. And as you can see, it's about a $66,000 difference between 0.75 increase and a 1% increase. So it provides about $60,000 each time you put it up by 0.25 rate revenue. All right. So if you went to 1.25, as Martin says, it would probably be closer to the $130,000 deficit mode, where it's a factor out of council's hands because of that paying the financial assistance grants in 1920 and offsetting by the 561. If those two events didn't happen, if you went to 1.25%, that would probably would have been close to zero if those other two events didn't happen. All right, that's the 1.25% factor.
David Hobick?
Yeah, thank you. I'm going for the 4%, but what I've heard is I think we should increase that, and for the long-term longevity of the council and the ratepayers. Now, I won't be here in bloody 9 years, obviously, either on council or whether I'm still around, but I'd like to do the right thing. So 1.25 seems pretty good to me. Thank you.
Yeah, just clarifying, David, you said 4%, but it was option 4 you were talking about.
That is correct.
I'm back. Someone's put an attention but without a name, so I'll go to Don, and if whoever's put an attention without a name, if you can just do that again for me. So Don.
Yeah, thanks, Bim. Could have been me. I'm taking the lead from both Daves. I would feel a lot more comfortable at an extra 0.25% rather than the 1%. I feel very uncomfortable with those deficits for so long. That's just my 2 bobs worth.
Thank you. Any other comments, Martin?
Yeah, assuming that's the end of the main comments, I guess I'll just reiterate what I've been asked to do is to provide various models going forward. So really, you've got an understanding what's in the base, you've got an understanding of what the 0.25 means. So my next position is, I think, is if we can, we'll try to get a special meeting up for the workshop next week, and we will provide the options, and you will need to debate which ones you're in and give the okay to me to finalise the documents and then get it out on consultation. So I may have jumped the gun because I can see a couple of other attentions. I was just trying to wrap that bit up.
No, it's fine. David De Vries and then David Hayvick.
Yeah, I wasn't actually suggesting 1.25. I don't know whether that, how would that actually work in terms of the forward years, Mark? Would that dig us out of the hole? I mean, should it be 1.5? Should it be 2? What is the magic number by which we actually don't end up in a hole? That would be my question. I'm not saying we do it. I just like to know what it is.
In response to that question, because the way that the rating increases, as you've seen, what happens when you reduce it from 2.25 to 1% to the future years, it has a snowballing or cumulative effect. So what is $65,000 in year 1 is $130 in year 2, and so on. So that would certainly bring the council's operating position back into surplus position probably by about year 5 or 6, based on those forward projections. So that's certainly something that council can probably digest a little bit more than what the current projections are showing. And certainly if the increase is higher, then council may wish to consider increasing the rebate provision amount for the 1 year and see what happens after that first year, and certainly give some relief from or remission in rates to those that really need it by a higher percentage or higher amount of dollars back to those who actually are suffering, because that means the rates are increasing even higher for those. But that's something for council to consider. And I did have my hand up, and just in relation to the suggestion by the CEO for a meeting to have a look at the options so council could make a decision in a council meeting. We wouldn't have the business plan ready by next Wednesday. So that would mean another special meeting the following week, perhaps, to have a business plan for council to adopt for consultation purposes.
Yeah, I agree with what Mark's saying. Sorry, I've got to put my hand up. Yeah, but we need to get the option now so that we can actually get the documents to you, and that has to happen in this meeting.
Mark, what if we were to leave the rate and the dollar the same? Just following on from what I was saying before, what would that effectively mean? Would that be 2.5, 1.75? Where would that get us? You can tell I'm being political here, but I'm just trying to get an understanding. If the rate and the dollar stayed the same, but we allowed growth, or rather allowed increase in valuations to increase our revenue, where would that leave us?
Sorry, put my microphone on. Just switching back to option 4, which is the 1%. As you can see, we've reduced the rates in the dollar, ranging from 1.4 up to 2%. If we didn't change the rates in the dollar, you'd be looking at over 2% easily, and on average, they've increased somewhere between 3 and 4%, and that's taking out the growth. If we add the growth back in, you're looking at about 5%. So no matter what we do, exactly from, sorry.
So no matter what we do, we'll be decreasing our rates the way Light is doing it, if you want to use that political discussion point. So the question is, by how much do we decrease the rate in the dollar? And just to fill in the blanks, I guess to not dig ourselves in a hole, we go back to 2.25. Is that correct?
With the current situation that council finds itself in financially, by being fairly prudent on its expenses over the years, 2.25 may have been too much, because you remember last year council was able to reduce the increase down to 1.98, because of the fact that council was able to make some cost savings and to really realise, I suppose, what was needed to be sustainable. And that was sufficient for that long-term plan then. So 2.25 may have been too much in the general rate revenue, looking at it again this year.
So 1.75, 2, which one would you suggest would have come the closest if COVID hadn't been in the mix?
If COVID hadn't been in the mix, we wouldn't have about $500,000 on the expense line, because there's 150,000 in there for rebates and 330 for the recovery plan. So there's $500,000 that council is now trying to find to get itself in a surplus position. So technically speaking, council could go into a deficit by $500,000 and not be worse off from what it was a year ago. But then that affects the future years, and that's the thing, it's affecting the future years. But if you look at all the options, council is in a fine position from a cash perspective for all three options. In the long term, cash is not the problem, it's the operating results the problem. And part of that, a good 25% of that is depreciation, as I mentioned in the earlier slide. And if we refine that again over the next few months with the IAMPS and the building condition audit, and find that the buildings and so forth may be in a better condition than what we've got in the books at the moment, and that's what we're hoping. I'm not saying that's the outcome because I don't know the outcome. Then council in a year's time may be finding they don't need to put 2.75 increase. It may not be that high. We don't know that at this point in time, so we're going with what we do know, and that's what's on the books at the moment. And it needs 2.75 to make an operating position be fine. But if we find the assets are in a better shape and better condition, then the 2.75 might not be real. And by increasing it by 1.25 this year, if that's what council does, we can probably reduce down the 2.75s that are in the back end years back to the 2.5s again, because we're back in a surplus position, so there's no need to try and catch up on what was lost. So that'll also have that effect of bringing the future rate increases down as well, just to keep council's self in an operating surplus position.
Okay, Bim, I'll wrap up just by saying I'm probably leaning towards a figure between 1.75 and 2, probably 1.75.
Sorry, that's with growth.
That's with growth, yes.
Yeah, so the underlying increase is 1% less than that.
No, I mean, at the moment, option 4 says 1%. I'm suggesting 1.75.
Thanks. David Haybick and then Russell.
Just coming in there, I don't agree with 1.75. 1.25, look, we have people out there that are struggling, and I think what's been said by Mark is that will keep things in order if we go 1.25, and I would not be pushing any further than that. I'm sorry.
So just to reiterate, all these options will come forward if we agree to a special meeting next week. You can then tell us by that meeting what is the option, and then we can finish the business plan and budget.
Yeah, has anyone got anything further to add? As Martin has said, all those options can come back to us then, and you can see it again a bit further. Russell, you got anything further to add? And I've got a couple of tensions there without any names.
That's me. I'm just wanting to ask a question about the future valuations. So if COVID-19 impacts are such that we start to see retraction in the housing market and businesses becoming worth less, will we see an impact on the valuations, and what will that mean for future discussions about rate increases, please?
The valuation is a number that we use to calculate the rate revenue. The other number that we use in that mix is the rate in the dollar. As valuations increase more than the council revenue, then councils reduce their rate in the dollar to reach the rate revenue, total rate revenue needed to run the business. So if valuations decrease in the future, council may find itself in a situation where the rates in the dollar are increased to ensure that the general rates raised to provide the business is what council needs. But going back on the CEO's comment, some of those service areas may need to be reviewed at that point in time too, or at any point in time, to ensure that the service provision is what council requires, both levels and the types of services. Just one point I'd like to add, as you mentioned the valuations, the Valuer General backed off on their valuations for the 2021 financial year, but when you have a look at primary production, it's the highest increase still of 4.39, even if they've backed off the increases. And that's where the grape growers sit and all the other primary producers, of course. And that was one of the ones that they were targeting, but the increase is still sitting up there at 4.39.
Tony.
Yeah, thanks, Bim. I can see where both Dave or the two Daves are coming from, but I think we've got to be realistic. So if Mark could give us a sliding scale of, say, we've got the 1%, but 1.25, 1.5, and 1.75, and then let's just look at the options, or there might be something in between. Who knows? But I think if we've got all the options there, I know it's a little bit of work for Mark, but I think we've really got to be, because if something happens over the coming years, we've got no wriggle room at all, and that would concern me that if something big happened, we're going to be in deep water, so to speak. So is that possible, Mark?
It certainly is. So at this stage, I'm hearing that the information that Council is looking for the special meeting is a 1%, 1.25, 1.5 and 1.75 plus growth on all those four options.
Yeah, that's how I see it.
Sorry to interject, it also have to have 0 to comply with the prior resolution.
Could you just repeat that, Martin?
The prior resolution of the council was to bring a 0 rate increase to the council to debate as well.
Yeah, that's correct. So we need all those to come in, and I guess the other point is still a review of service levels into the future, and I think that's something that we've got to really do a bit of a deep dive on, rather than just keep on rolling along the way we have been. Just look at those things in more detail. Okay, I reckon we've sort of exhausted that. Is no one else had anything that hasn't? Anybody else who hasn't said anything want to jump in with anything? If not, we'll move on to the next item.
Bev, I think Russell and I had attentions.
Oh yeah, I've just seen it. Yep, gotcha.
Yeah. Look, I'll be very quick. I just wanted to make it clear. When I said 1.75, I'm saying I'd like to see that modelled up. I'm not suggesting we do it because this isn't a council meeting. This is a workshop, but I'd like to see what those numbers are. So basically what Tony was saying, I think I 100% agree with.
Thank you, Russell.
Just quickly, Martin, when we consult, do we need to consult on our the nature of the way in which we're going to provide assistance, or can that wait for another day?
What will be in the consultation document will ultimately reflect what's in the budget and business plan. So if there is a rebate in it, it will reflect that.
But not the mechanism.
Let me think about that.
Okay.
Only because I have a bit of experience with the difficulty. There is a real difficulty with determining how to go about getting independently verifiable information about whether people qualify for such rebates. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. We'll move on to the drought communities program. As you're aware, we left this one lie on the table for further discussions. We sort of worked through the various options and we touched on the tourism town signs, and then we talked about the Eden Valley, Mount Pleasant and Macolta standpipe. And then there was another slide that I asked Martin to circulate today just to see what other priorities or whether there was other options to consider as far as getting a more wider spread and a better return from that drought funding. And there is set criteria for that, which I know Martin's pretty well, he is across it all. So I'll throw that open for further discussions. I guess there's that slide that Martin did present to us. There was footpaths the next priority. There's also the likelihood of a couple of projects in the bush gardens, along with the visitor centre car park, and then also the reconciliation projects. But bear in mind, we've also got the big project sitting in the background where some of this funding could also be used to leverage other funds. So I'll throw it open to anyone who wants to dive in. And I think I've got you, Martin, there now. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll just try to streamline this for you a little bit. Remember, the matter is lying on the table. So those that are actually already being presented have to be debated at the next meeting. So really what I need feedback on is what other options do you want put in front, not debating the same ones, and then you'll sort that out at the next meeting. Because you can't go back on that. That is a debate currently on the floor of the council.
Yep, thanks for clarifying that. Kathy Schilling.
That's all right. After Martin's comments, I'll retract what I wanted to say. Thanks.
Carla?
Yeah, just a query on one of the suggestions there. So obviously we need to make sure this is something that fits into the criteria. I think our soccer pitch development out at New York, if we can start doing some work on that, that'd be great. But how would that fit into this funding program?
Yeah, the funding program, Carla's fairly wide. I think the reconciliation one in hindsight may struggle, but certainly sporting and community infrastructure is reasonably consistent. Obviously, I haven't run that one past the department, but they're really quick in responding. So it is whatever comes out today, I can quickly run that past them. But my reading of the FAQs and the documents is that is reasonably consistent. Yes. We've got the data obviously to try and link that to jobs and economic activity as well.
David De Vries and then David Hobick.
Okay, with that in mind, it sounds like basically what we're sitting on at the moment is a bunch of grant money that's probably going to be approved fairly easily. Why are we looking to spend money on things which haven't been sort of thought through yet? Why don't we go down the list of the big project items and start picking off those which the team believe has the most likelihood of success, which is the highest up the list? That seems to me to make the most sense. It's not free money, but if it's exactly what we've been looking for is grant opportunities. It's being provided to the community because of the drought, not necessarily to alleviate drought. I think the idea is that it recognises that drought has happened, that the community has been hit by that, and it's trying to help us get a leg up. And by spending money on the things which the community have already, through our consultation with the big project, declared are things that they want to see happen, that seems to me to be a very sensible way to spend the money. So rather than looking for things outside of the work that we've already done, why don't we look at the work that the community has already given the thumbs up to and say, okay, of those items, the ones that Joe and the others believe have the best chance of receiving the support, we should put those forward.
Thank you. David Hobick and Martin and then Carla.
Honestly, I think that drought money should go to drought affected areas such as what it's deemed for. I don't believe in putting all the eggs in the one basket and spending it all in the big project. I think that we should think of things that affect the people that have been affected by drought. And that is water and roads and whatever, and the bush gardens and places like that. That's my thoughts. I don't believe that we should be spending it on one area, and I don't believe that we should be spending it on things that can be done otherwise. It needs to be in relation to drought. So what we need to consider also is that we need to put things into place for drought in the next number of years. Not only this year's gone, so we need to think about ensuing years. And I think that's where we need to be coming from, and that's what the people, and I've spoken to a number of people and so forth, and that's what they come up with as well. And I can honestly say that road signs is not one of them.
Martin.
I was just going to clarify that the FAQs actually require it. Whilst it's called a drought fund, it's actually an economic development fund. It's about jobs. So you have to link whatever we do to try and to grow jobs, or at least support jobs in our community. The other thing I was just going to quickly say, if any of the allocations are provided to activities under the big project, because of the way that we've structured the big project, it would lever it up. So for argument's sake, let's just do the easy figure. If you put $1 million to the big project activities, you would actually get a $2.5 million spend, because you've already got the lever up money sitting in the budgets. If you did $500,000 and say a few less to the, the Eden Valley, Mount Pleasant and Macolta activities, which the department say we can make the case for that, absolutely. You might still have $500,000 spare, so you can lever up to $1.25 million of big project activities.
Carla, and then John Angus.
I think just to go back to what Councillor Havik said there, I do think, I've mentioned the New York for soccer pitch there, but I do think we need to be very aware of where we're looking at spending this money, and I do think it needs to be spent in drought communities. So I think that water infrastructure program that we have talked about is really critical, and I think it fits what we need to be doing here. In terms of community perception, I think that's going to be appreciated there. Again, I don't agree with the town signage project. I can't see how that's really going to benefit our drought communities. With the water infrastructure, we can see that that's going to create jobs through construction. It's going to support local contractors, we would hope. So looking at something similar to that, I think is important. I certainly wouldn't support putting the majority of this money behind the big project, because I think that's something completely separate.
Yeah, John.
Thanks, Bim. Look, I agree with Carla. I think you've made some very good points. I believe that this funding really needs to be targeted at where the need is for drought relief, and that is the Mount Pleasant, Springton, Eden Valley, Macolta strip in terms of water infrastructure. If there is, and I don't think we need to spend money where it is not necessary, but if there's anything left over, and I would hope that there would be, I don't have any problem with it being used to, source extra grant funds for whatever project is the most worthy. So, but I think the initial drought-affected people really would love to see something tangible that, next time there is a drought, and there will be one, they don't have to drive a 40k round trip once a day. It might only be a 15k or a 10k or a 4k trip, and we can at least say, well, we have tried and maybe succeeded in making your life a little bit easier. That's all. Thanks.
Russell, and then Don.
I'm inclined to agree with Carla about the town signage. I think we're going to look for another bucket of money for that money, and I'm not convinced that would necessarily create jobs for locals in complicated signage. But sadly, I have to take a bit of a risk here and talk about the bush gardens. The little project there, particularly the one about the pad, it will have an ongoing impact because it'll improve the bush garden's capability to grow better plants.
Hang on a minute, Russell. You're breaking up. There's something wrong with your audio. Can you just fiddle with that for a moment? And I'll go to Don.
Is that better? I haven't changed anything.
No, it's still breaking up.
Is it breaking up for everyone?
I can hear all right.
Yeah, it's audible.
Okay, well, carry on then. All right.
Just go to straight.
Yep.
I'm just going to change the audio settings. Go to Don and come back to me.
No, you're okay now. You're good now.
Okay. So the bush gardens project is actually about growing plants that people in drought affected areas can use. So that has a ongoing impact, and there will be a small jobs component in constructing that thing, but more importantly, it'll make life better for the volunteers there. Thanks.
Yeah, Don.
Yeah, this very, very simple question is probably more aimed at Matt. When we start talking about jobs, I reflect on the footpath program, and I then start to think how many local jobs we get out of the new footpaths here in Mount Pleasant. And I see a engineering firm come in from outside the area. They've done a fantastic job. I'll never knock them for what they've done, but I don't see anything local. And that's my concern when we start doing some of these projects. Is there anything sort of through our procurement policies that stops us using some more localised people in some of these projects, so there's actually tangible benefits for the people from this area, rather than bringing someone in from outside, even though they do an excellent job, and I'm not going to knock them in any way whatsoever?
It's actually probably my question, that one. The procurement system in local government is restrictive in that you can't give fear or favour to any particular person, but we've worked with the small business group and Ian Nightingale's group for years about refining policies such that when we do assessments of tenders and quotes, we weight local benefit. So that local benefit might actually be like with the solar power, because we actually don't have a system, because I've just awarded that contract. We don't have a solar power supplier in the Barossa that's big enough to do our project, but they've guaranteed a certain amount of spend at the local level. You can't fundamentally, under the law, say I'm going to give it to these people because they're local. The Local Government Act does not allow it. Simple as that. So what we do within the policy and the assessment processes is weight local benefit. Now that may not be employment, but they may buy their materials from our area. In terms of the particular one you're talking about, I'll let Matt answer that. But that's how we get around that restriction. Well, not get around it. It's how we try to add value in terms of when we assess tenders and quotations to get some local benefit from it.
Thanks, Martin. That's all I need to know. You've explained it very, very well. You've escaped, Matt.
David and then Kathy.
Sorry, Mayor, can we just stop for a minute? Who's CM? All right. CM. Somebody has shared their screen.
Yes, I something and I don't know where it is. It's me, Richard.
Right. In the middle of that box.
Where it is?
You know where that, yep, press the X.
Have I done that correctly now?
Yep, correct. Thank you.
Thank you. No worries. Sorry about that, folks.
Yeah, David and then Kathy.
Yeah, sorry, we seem to be talking about signs and water. I thought they were already parked and that we were talking about additional things that might go on the list. So that's why I ignored those when I was speaking prior. So given that, just so everybody's clear, I too don't think that the signage project is ready yet. I don't think, obviously, sufficient councillors understand the benefits and recognise what we're trying to do. And I think a lot more work needs to be done on that. So I think, like everyone else, that should be parked for the time being. So I'm not championing that in one way, shape or form. In regards to the water, I align with John on this one. I think that some of the water plans are important, but in speaking to members of the staff, I also think that some of them maybe are not as necessary as others. With that in mind, that's why I was saying before that we shouldn't need to spend money on things if we don't have to. I think if there is a benefit to the community, and if it turns out that half the money is spent on water and the other half is spent on some other element, and as the mayor said, as the CEO said, if by doing that, that leverages additional money so that we can actually get a bigger bang for our buck and progress the big project. If we can show people that even under the current climate that we're in with COVID-19, that we are still able to progress and to deliver and to give the community the very things which the community at the last election was saying they definitely wanted us to deliver on, I think that's a win-win. It means that we are providing water for future drought issues, but we're providing it, again, I'll use the same expression, in a targeted manner, in a way where we get the maximum benefit. And the remainder of the money then goes towards building job opportunities, leveraging so that we can get the big project progressing. So I think that would be a good compromise. I think it'd be a good way to sort of get the best of both worlds.
Thanks, David. Kathy.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo most of those opinions anyway. I really agree with Carla and John. I think that it needs to be going to the areas that are affected. But interestingly, when Russell was talking about the bush gardens, I reckon that has a spin-off effect to the whole of the valley, like with the seeds, you know, the natural seeds, the original seeds going back out into the area, reseeding those, you know, the fire affected areas. But also, I just thought with reconciliation, Martin, you mentioned that might not fit, but you know, if we put money into the bush gardens, eventually that may be something that can be streamlined into reconciliation as well. You know, with some of those ideas that we might have had to use that area as part of the reconciliation committee, unless there was another thought that you had to do with reconciliation that I'm not aware of. So over to you with that.
No, it was one of the thought bubbles when we just put together a bit of a list. That's all.
Kathy Schilling.
Yes, well, I thought we weren't debating the topics, but my original comments were around the bush gardens as well, because I feel that that would protect the income generation for that site, which I think is important, which would then become an economic benefit. But we haven't talked about climate change and any projects that can be helping with any climate change effects in our region. So has any thought been put towards that, Martin?
Not from this bucket. I mean, obviously our main project this year is $660,000 worth of solar. So, and I actually haven't even turned my mind to where the climate change projects fall into it. Sorry, so I don't know the answer to that one, Kathy, but I'll have a look.
Thank you. I don't have a vote on any of this, but I do have comments to make. First and foremost, just on the town signage, I can tell you, you've got just about every town committee out there wanting to see those signs either pulled down or replaced with something far more appropriate. There's been extensive consultation with them, and my personal view, and it's only going to be my view because I won't have a vote, and the reality of things is I think it's a golden opportunity to clean up our current town signs that are well and truly past their use-by date, and try to put something up there that's going to be far more attractive and promote our council, because the ones that are out there at the moment, and I put them there, and that's how long ago they are, they're rusted, they're worn out, they're an embarrassment. And just bear in mind that there's been extensive consultation, and I know all of the town committees, and I know people from Stockwell have asked me when's the town signs going in and stuff like that. So I just leave that in your deliberations. As far as the bush gardens, I do like the thought of picking up at least one or two of those little projects that they've identified there. The water side of things, I always felt that Eden Valley, Mount Pleasant and Macolta were the ones to go for. I don't think there's going to be too many local jobs come out of that, because it's all about certain mechanisms that go in. There might be an odd plumber that might be able to do it, but it's all got to be done to SA water standards. So that may limit who's going to get a job as far as the water's concerned, as far as local employment's concerned. I am aware of a bit of a groundswell back up in the school precinct in Tanunda. as far as a little bit more safety is concerned. I'll be sort of catching up and meeting with a few people. I sat there this morning watching what was moving up through that area, and I've had a brief chat with senior management today, and I think there might be some opportunities there. But I just wanted to highlight the fact that I would see that there's opportunities that we just got to be aware that all those town committees with the signage, yeah, the Eden Valley, Mount Pleasant, McCulter, great, way to go, should happen. And then, of course, the Bush Gardens I'm leaning towards. So I leave my thoughts with you to consider when you make your choices and your vote. Any other comments? If not, we'll move on.
Yeah, Bim, can you see my at?
Bim, you're on mute.
Yes, I see them now. I've come back from my, my words. So yeah, carry on. I think, Kathy, we had Carla.
Yeah, Bim, I just wanted to clarify some of my comments around the town signage before. I don't want to give the wrong impression. I do think that is a really important project that we need to be pursuing. I just don't think that this is the right funding stream for it. So I think we need to be keeping an eye out for any opportunities that come up that are going to fit that project, but I don't believe that the Drought Communities program is the right one.
That's Tony.
Yeah, I'd have to endorse what Carla was just saying, Bim. Even though the signs are supposedly old, which they are, a bit like me, but I just think we've got to have a better proposition put before us, because the last one was pretty basic, I would have thought. The sign and the sample of the sign that was forwarded to me, it was just horrible. So I don't really know what they intend, what needs to go on these signs. So there's got to be a lot more discussion made about that before we just go with a big red patch in the middle, if that's what it was. So I'd like to see something else more worthwhile at this point in time, and just have that one put on the back burner.
That's fine. That's all within your abilities to do. David Hayvick.
Just going what you said, Mayor, I've been talking to people at Eden Valley and Stockwell in the last 2 or 3 days, and when you mentioned, if you mentioned to them, what would you rather have, new signs or money donated in favour of drought relief? And I can tell you what, you don't get the thumbs up for new signs. Sorry.
Sorry, just to clarify, that money can't be used for drought relief. That's an absolute exclusion.
What was that? Sorry, Martin, I was just looking away for a moment.
David made mention of providing the money for drought relief that can't be used for drought relief.
That's right. Okay. Yep.
So what money are we actually talking about then? I can see David's odd look.
Drought relief is things like payments for hardship and other ongoing support that the state and federal government supplies. This is a drought program, as I said at the beginning, to support economic jobs and activity in our community. You can't say, here's $1 million and then we're going to give people that are impacted $5,000. It's just not allowed. The program is about infrastructure and programs to support jobs, not about drought relief.
Okay. All had enough of that one? We'll come back with a list and it'll go to the chamber and you'll vote accordingly. Okay. We'll move on to the next item. And that is the council meeting directions and update with regard to electronic meetings. So Martin, I'll throw to you. You there, Martin?
Hit the wrong button, sorry. It's electronic meetings, not electronical, but that's all right. The previous item won't have any more items.
Just for me to butt in, I'm just reading off the agenda, so that's fine. But carry on.
Electronically, that is. The previous item, I just want to absolutely clarify that there will be no more report come back because the report's lying on the table. You will need to do it as part of the debate. Okay.
Yeah. No, that's fine. Sorry about that.
Council meeting. Okay, so a directions update came out late last week that allowed the exemption for council meetings and subcommittees. That exemption extends to the councillors, the mayor, required staff, and up to 10 people, and obviously maintaining the social distancing and the 1.5 metres. The Barossa Council doesn't have capacity for that 10 people because if we are going to live stream, and this is the first question that we really need to discuss, if we are going to continue providing that level of service, you'll have 3 directors, myself, Marissa and Gareth. So that's 6, with 12 of you is 18. The room can actually only legally have 27 in it. And because of the layout of the room, that's going to be difficult in any case, so long as people are happy to have them sitting behind them. I think we need to seriously consider what happens if the 10th person comes in. And the mechanism, I think we do need to continue with live streaming, but if we're going to do that, we actually have to set it up properly. So the only reason we got through the last meeting was by the goodness of some of my technical staff that use their equipment, and we hired over $1,200 worth of equipment to make that happen as well. So it's not a long-term sustainable thing unless we fund it properly. The actual model of trying to do hybrid is harder than either doing electronic or not doing electronic. We reviewed the meeting last and it went pretty well, but it was hard work in the chamber because we had a constant echo going on. It's actually easier for us to all just use Teams and we can live stream from that. Or you have to set up in the room, and you need to give me some budget because I don't know what it's going to cost to actually set the room up properly to live stream with the right mics, with the right videos, etc. So there's 3 fundamental things in that. I think we need some direction long term whether we are going to continue with live streaming. I think it's a great thing, and I'm not sure it's going to be massively expensive, but it's going to need a little bit of money. I think there is no chance of us setting up a live streaming outcome for the June meeting, so I prefer that it stayed electronic and that we move as fast as we can back to July. And we will need to put in some other mechanisms that if we do have more than 9 people turn up, we're going to maybe have to live stream it into the library or other locations as well. That's my thoughts.
Tony, I think you're first cab off the rate, off the plate.
Yeah,
Tony,
thanks,
and then
Bim.
Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Bim. I agree with the comments that Martin has made, but I had a meeting today where we had people outside the room listening to the conversation, and I don't think you get the same feeling at the meeting to see how people are feeling. You lose that. I mean, I can see everybody on the screen here, or 9 people now, but you don't seem to get that the guts of the meeting, for want of a better word. And if we can go back to our in the chambers, Martin, next month, I'd certainly be more in favour than doing it, even though the meeting went well last time. But I think we're just missing far too much, and we've got so many important things to discuss that we need to have that just that feeling in the room, which you don't get with what we're doing even now.
So my response to that is I'm not saying the next meeting, I'm saying July. If we are going to go June, how are we going to manage that? Because what happens if we have more than 9 people? Because I legally one way can't not let them in, and legally or another way I can't let them in.
I think we've got to jump that hurdle if it happens. I don't think we've had 9 people at a meeting since I've been a councillor, other than when it's to do with horses or ovals, and we don't have any of those issues just at the moment. So, you know, I think with the amount of important stuff that we've got to do, I think it's important that we all meet in the chamber and do the best we can. And if that is the case, perhaps have a camera somewhere that we can swing around and beam out into the library as you suggested. But because we're talking about millions of dollars, I think we've all got to be there together. It's far more important than worrying about if we get the mighty number.
Which I can't achieve for you because I can't get that set up by June.
No. We'll let all the others have their say. So David De Vries and then Carla.
Okay, I agree with Tony. The biggest problem I have with this type of meeting is, first off, I'm doing this as a career. I'm Zooming, and it's actually unhealthy to be staring at a screen like this for more than 2 hours at a time. The last meeting ran for 3.5, and even having breaks in between, unless you're willing to take 20-minute breaks every hour and a half, which would really drag the process out significantly. I have no problem with that if we want to go down that path, but that is a significant issue. It actually affects your concentration. It affects your whole process of making decisions. I recognise the logistical problems of this, Martin. Trust me, I actually do this for a career, and I absolutely intimately understand the issues. But none of those are insurmountable. And if you like, I'm happy to meet with the IT team and actually discuss it with them and bring in some consultants. We have to have this sorted as fast as possible. I believe we should be aiming for June. If at the last minute we can't do it, fair enough. There's no reason why we can't have what we're doing right now happening in the meeting while we're actually there. That can be done simultaneously. I do believe that the councillors need to be in the room at the same time. The technical staff could absolutely be in a booth outside if need be. In regards to this idea of more than 9 people, I can't believe that if there's a conflict, and obviously when these rules are established, that there must be some recognition that there is a conflict. That's simple. Then there must be one thing which will prevail over the other. The government just can't say to you, we're going to give you 2 conflicting rules, and if you can't do either, you can do neither at all. That makes no sense to me. So there must be a way to resolve that. And yes, it isn't easy for the staff. I recognise that. But at the end of the day, the purpose of these meetings is for the 12 of us to actually be trying to make the most best informed, best possible outcomes, decision-making outcomes that we can. And we should not have our attention diverted by all of these other technical issues. I generally believe that there were times in the meeting where I think the debate was sort of moving forward out of, like I felt people wanted to speak more but didn't because of the technical problems that they were having. Very difficult to communicate under these circumstances. And I totally agree with Tony with this. I don't believe we are giving the community our best in these circumstances. So we should be moving heaven and earth to try and get this done by June. But I'm willing to maybe say that if we can't make it work a week out, then we say, okay, well, then we'll have to pursue this process. But I'm not even convinced a hybrid model couldn't work in some form. But I'm willing to discuss this further later. But I really, really, really believe that this, and by the way, in terms of live streaming, yes, I agree that is probably something we need to just do as a matter of course. Parliaments are now live streamed. I think the community will want that, and that may also solve these issues of whether or not people can, be in the gallery or not. Okay, thanks.
Carla?
Yeah, I just wanted to support the idea of continuing with the electronic meetings. I think, logistically it makes sense, and I actually found the meeting last week to be quite good. I think it probably kept the debate moving more so than anything else. I've also spent a fair bit of my career working with this technology, and I couldn't see any major problems last week. Yes, there were a few sound issues, but they were pretty easily resolved. A lot of it was just muting a few different people or rooms. That sorted a lot of that there. So Martin, I certainly support you continuing with the electronic meetings. I think this is a great way of doing it. It makes it far more accessible to our community, and I think that can be seen by the figures.
Kathy, then John Angus.
Yeah, I'd just like to probably agree with Carla, because I've heard amazing things from the community. They're actually accessing it. I've got homeschooling friends who are showing people who are actually watching us for a change. So it's made kind of this element really, really accessible to our community. And I think we need to be making it easier for Martin to do what he has to do now, because I mean, we're right at the end. We're really getting really close, and it's only one more month. We just got to have that grace, and then in July, perhaps we could go with the live stream, but in chamber when the restrictions ease, because I think it's very hard to organise, and I'm not sure it would cost millions. I mean, I don't know, Martin, how much are we looking at realistically?
Oh, I don't think it's a massive amount of money. It's just a matter of time to set it up. Yeah.
John?
Okay. Well, I'm going to muddy the waters a bit, because while I have no problem with the electronic or electronical method of meeting, I'm inclined to agree with Dave. It does slow things down. It's easy to lose your place, especially when your screen goes blank, as I know yours has, Bim, and mine has from time to time. I'm not sure that we're not making a mountain out of a molehill. For want of allowing the public, who almost never show, but sometimes do, I would have thought we could schedule a meeting in the Newry Town Hall for June, where there would be ample room for social distancing, and you could have 50 of the public in there. It won't cost very much at all in terms of technical know-how. I'm not really sure why it costs so much to live stream. I mean, we could certainly even have our meetings in the chamber, and like you see at funerals, where the funeral service is piped out into the church hall or whatever, our meeting could be piped out into the library or into the foyer, and there is room for probably 10 or 20 people to sit out there. So I don't want to create, a whiz-bang wheel when we've actually got a round one anyway.
Just again, I don't think it's a lot amount of money. It's just a bit of time to set it up. And you can't have 20, you can't have 50 people out there. You can only have 10 as of next week, 20. And you can't move it to the Newry Town Hall, sorry, John, because that's a resolution of the council. So we would need a meeting to change that meeting time, that meeting location. So again, it's not. I'm not trying to make a mountain out of a molehill. I take your point. And I'm not saying this is impossible. I'm just saying we need a bit of time to set it up, and I don't think it'll be overly expensive.
Thank you. David Haybick.
So on this occasion, I must agree with Dave and Tony and John, what you've said. I think the time has now come to think about getting back to basics, and what council is all for is to have their meetings in the chamber, and that's how it should be done. Maybe we could continue on with the workshops on the system. So that's something to think about as well. That's my thoughts. Thanks.
Russell?
Is my microphone working now?
Yep.
So do you need to come back with a number as to what it'll cost, or have you got enough discretion to go away and sort the thing out, Martin?
Oh yeah, and I've got discretion to sort it out. I thought the directions have come out, and I assume you read the directions. I thought we better talk about it. That's all. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's actually me that sits where the meeting is held under the current rules. But you know, like I said to Bim today, if the majority want to try to get back in the chamber, I'm not dumb.
Can we pipe it out into the library?
It's not an issue of piping out to the library. It's an issue. Fundamentally, we're talking about the technical solution here to go back to the meeting room so that we can continue to live stream, because I think that is, I totally agree with Carla and the others that we've had a huge amount of hits. I think Carla just put up 130. So, yeah, I've had people talking to me about it too, that it was wonderful, and some it was long, and some said they went and got a cup of coffee when a certain presentations. Or I think you also got to understand, last meeting was a very odd meeting. Well, there were a couple of really tough issues, lots of deputations. They're not going to go that long normally, and we've got some improvements we can put in there as well. But I mean, clearly what you're asking me is to get back to the office as quick as we can, and if that's June, fine, but we should be setting up the technology to make sure we remain accessible whenever that time is. That's my interpretation.
Yeah, Tony, and then David.
Martin, is there any reason why we can't do this Teams meeting exactly like we're doing, but have a laptop in front of us all as we do, and live stream that out like we're doing exactly now? So that the live stream is actually working to everyone if they're listening to this workshop tonight. So why can't we all sit into the chamber and live stream it, as someone suggested, out to the people and maybe to the library? I just don't know where we're going with all of this, because, and what other technology. And the thing is that we could be doing this now, and in 2 months' time we've spent all this money for zilch, for jam. So I'm really against spending a whole lot of money just to boom it out when we could do it straight from our laptops from the chamber.
The reality about that is it won't work, because everybody's going to have their speaker on listening to you, and it's just going to reverberate right back at you. That just, it actually isn't possible. Not by June, and to achieve that, I'd probably need to. I don't think we've wasted any money. What we've actually spent most money on is cleaning and Teams, so that we could actually still function. And all we're talking about potentially is some cameras, some good mics, and some other bits and pieces. That's probably $5,000. It's, again, I'll repeat, it's not a big expenditure to have 130 people in the community actually watch what we do. It's the time. It's time. It's just time. I mean, only a week before that, the commissioner came out of police and said, no, we can't have meetings, which was actually previously at odds with another legal advice. So that's why the direction came out. At the end of the day, I'm going to be in the office. It's no skin to me, but you've got to give me time to get the technological solutions in. It won't work by having you all operating on Teams in the chamber. It just won't.
Why couldn't we use our headphones, Martin, like we're doing now? If we were sitting there, we wouldn't have the noise and the feedback, surely. I mean, that's not the case, is it?
You'll get feedback, all right? I had my door shut in my office and Marissa out in her office with the door shut, with headphones going, and we still got feedback, just because the mics, etc., are so sensitive.
Yeah, I echo those sentiments. The feedback was unbearable, what I was getting through my ear at the same time. And it's not so much feedback, it's the delayed feedback. So if you're speaking, you hear your voice in delay through your ear, and it was terrible. David, then Carla and John.
Okay, first off, it seems like there's a few people who seem to think that this is an either or proposition. It's not. I'm never once suggested. In fact, I said many times, I think that we should be live streaming. I don't think that should stop. And I agree with you, Carla. I think that is great for the community. And that's great. But I don't think that should be at the expense of the debate. And BIM was struggling at the last meeting because of the technical problems, and they weren't solved. Now, the technical issues that Martin's talking about are simply the problems of that the audio is being collected through Teams. It doesn't need to be. If we're in the room all talking to each other and we're using our usual microphones and we're listening through our usual speakers, you can use that same equipment. All of that signal can be gathered and it can then be pumped through, and that can be the streaming audio. These are not difficult problems to solve. And if people are saying they are, I can get you the phone numbers of people who can, for an incredibly low price, solve these problems for you. These are really basic stuff. I swear to God, this is like, in my career, this is like me telling John that it's difficult to plant wheat or grow lambs or what. It's just not. This is not difficult stuff. And in regards to, look, if we can't get it done by June, fair enough. But I think we should at least give it a go and see if we can. I do believe that we should be able to have the best possible level of meeting that we can. I think the community would prefer it if we were at our best. And I also believe the community want, as they are voting with their feet, to actually see us in play. And I think that's a great thing. So I don't think this is an either or situation. I think we can have both. If it is not technically possible to get this done by June, fair enough. But if it is technically possible to get this done by June, I think we should at least attempt that. And Tony, in regards to the cost, mate, this is minuscule. I doubt if it would hit 10,000. It's probably half that. And this is something we just need to do anyway, because we've spoken about this before. We could have a second wave and a third wave and a fourth wave, and we need to be ready to go back in and out as the need may be. But I think the other thing, and Carla's made this point, and I totally agree with her on this, the community want us to be visible, and they want this to be able to witness the council meetings as a live stream. And I think that's for the good.
Carla, John, and then Don.
Yeah. I think we're probably just losing sight of the issues here. We're talking about the June meeting, which is not very far away. And I think, in my mind, one of the biggest issues there is the legislative directions, as Martin's highlighted. That's not something we can get around. That is what it is. So I think for the staff's benefit, it's going to be easier if we continue as is for June at least, and look at moving forwards toward July. And to echo what Dave just said about the costs, Tony, it's not a waste of money. This is something that once it's set up, we're going to have it there for as long as we need it. And really, the cost is going to be nothing.
John?
Thanks, Bim. Yes, I'm just going to say I fully endorse a permanent system of live streaming all our meetings. I think it gives us, or gives everyone access to us, and I hope, I think there are lots of councils that are already doing it, and if there's nothing good that's come out of COVID-19, maybe this is one thing that is good. It's a better form of engagement with our community, and yeah, it becomes a permanent fixture.
Don, and I reckon we can pretty well wrap it up after that.
Thanks, Bim. Love live streaming. Want it to continue. Very mindful of the work this is going to cause Martin between now and June. My preference is well and truly in the council chamber. I was looking at the body language. People might not realise it, but many years ago I used to be a detective, and I was watching the body language as we kept going around 11 times to get a yes, time and time again. It wasn't very good, and that's why I would very much like to get back in the council chamber. That's my 2 bobs worth. Thank you.
Thanks everybody, and I'm going to get new glasses shortly too, that my eyesight's changing, so I'll be able to get that word electronically right. Everybody, look, it's been good, but I think on this one we're all aware of what the legislation is, what the requirements are, and as Martin said, he's aware of what our preferences is to get back in the chamber. I agree the live streaming is the way of the future, and as Carla, as you've put up, 130 people viewing it, and different people you come in contact with, and you sort of hear they're all been watching it. So it's interesting to see that there's that level of interest, and that's great. But once again, it's the timing and whether all these things will be pulled off in the time frame that Martin has indicated. So at the end of the day, it's probably he's aware of what our preferences are, and if it can be done, it can be done. If it can't be, well, we'll just persevere until it can be. Okay, thanks everybody. I think we can wrap it up at that point. So if you wish, Martin, you can sort of stop the recording.